excessive red tape is making it too complicated to develop vacant properties and is contributing to the housing crisis. That's the view of Hugh Wallace, director at Douglas Wallace Architects, who joins us now. Hugh, what's the problem here as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think we have a set of building regulations which were formed and designed around new builds, and they're trying to be shoehorned into existing buildings. And in particular, that has to do with fire, and regulations in relation to fire are not suitable for our existing stock of 160,000 houses. And there needs to be derogations and changes made to those regulations. That's the first starting point. And it's a bit like when somebody buys a house, a family buy a home that needs renovation, and somebody turns around and says, oh, you need to get a fire cert. There's sort of, people go into horror because it does have an implication on cost. And it does have an implication as to whether or not you can actually get a fire cert. Because the regulations, as I say, pertain to new builds rather than old builds.
Okay, look, what you're saying makes perfect sense in a very practical way. But I suppose if I'm a minister and I'm thinking, oh, hang on a second, we're talking about diluting fire certs. Like, are we getting into dangerous territory there? We've seen really shoddy building in the past when maybe standards haven't been what they should have been.
No, I don't think that isn't the case. This is about using different engineering methods to provide safety in the home for where people live. So I'm not suggesting that in some way there aren't regulations. You can't have a free for all. So this is about delivering regulations that are suitable for old buildings. And, there's a huge push on by the government and everyone else to look at old buildings. There's a stock of 160,000 houses out there, and we need to convert those into homes. And if you did 20,000 of those a year, that would have a huge impact in delivering
It would.
the housing needs for this country.
Yeah, it would. I'm also thinking about premises over the shop. Like there is, like it's the same I know in all cities, but you particularly see it in Dublin. Like almost no living over the shop, and again, I think a lot of that is down to regulations.
It is. That's exactly it. And the regulations have to change because if we're to have thriving cities and sustainability and 15-minute cities and towns, we have to move back into them. And at the moment, the regulations are sort of tripping us up, tripping the country up in being able to do that. So this to me is a really fundamental issue that needs to be addressed. And what I find and I get really frustrated about is it's like, oh, this is a problem. It's been a problem since the building regulations, particularly Part B, which has to relate to fire, came into action. And yet only now are we starting to address it. And in fact, I think that when they spoke to the department in relation to this, they said, oh, they were going to look at it next year. And I'm going, next year is too late. Why
Yeah.
can't we do these things now?
Yeah. Is it something you are seeing through your work? Are clients of yours just running into red tape and heavy regulations? And maybe have you kind of practical examples of the kind of things people are being asked to do?
Well, you have a problem here that you obviously have sustainability in relation to the use of energy. And there's a sort of a mismatch between SEAI grants and being able to avail fully of them if you have an old house and the walls are built of a mixture of stone and rubble, which the vast majority are.
Mm.
And therefore, it's difficult to get that home up to a minimum standard to avail of maximum grants. And that's another thing that has to be looked at. In fact, this is about encouraging people to refurbish our towns and cities. So, in my opinion, there should be no VAT on first time buyers or on people doing refurbishments.
Okay, interesting. So if you're refurbishing a house that's in bad shape, I mean, how do you measure whether or not you get the VAT rebate or not?
Because it's about cost. So you
Yeah.
should be submitting what your costs are, and if you get above a certain threshold, which should be a very modest threshold, you get your VAT back. But if you're refurbishing an old building, it costs more than building a new building. Let's call
Yeah,
a
yeah,
spade,
yeah.
and therefore there has to be some incentive.
Okay, interesting, really interesting idea. Hard to disagree. Hugh Wallace, director at Douglas Wallace Architects. Thank you for talking to Newstalk Breakfast.